January 26th, 1943. 02 degrees 00 minutes north, 0 degrees 0 minutes east. 139 degrees 33 minutes east, north of New Guinea. The hand holding the pencil paused slightly as Lieutenant George Grider wrote in his personal log, recording words that would haunt American naval history for decades to come. The captain has ordered all weapons to fire on the boats. This is not what any of us expected when we joined the submarine service. Through the periscope, Commander Dudley Walker, Mush Morton, had just witnessed something that contradicted every principle of maritime warfare he had learned at the Naval Academy 13 years earlier. 20 lifeboats and motorized launches bobbed in the tropical waters, filled with survivors from the transport ship his submarine had just torpedoed. In peacetime, in any previous war, the next action would have been clear. Submarines leave survivors alone, honour the ancient laws of the sea. Yet here, in waters controlled by neither ally nor enemy, Morton was about to issue an order that would transform submarine warfare forever. The crew of USS Wahoo stood at their battle stations, 79 men who had trained for torpedo attacks, not this. The submarine had surfaced to recharge batteries after sinking the 5,447-ton Buyo Maru. What none of them knew was that among those desperate figures in the lifeboats were 195 Indian prisoners of war, Allied soldiers captured at Singapore, being transported to slave labour camps. The mathematics of total war were about to be written not in strategy rooms, but in machine gun fire across tropical waters. The transformation had begun on July 17, 1907, in Owensboro, Kentucky, where Dudley Walker Morton entered the world. The boy who would become the most aggressive submarine commander in American naval history grew up landlocked, 1,000 miles from the nearest ocean. His father, a small-town merchant, had never imagined his son would command one of the most sophisticated war machines ever built. Morton entered the United States Naval Academy in June 1926, part of a class that would lose more members to combat than any since the Civil War. Standing 6 feet tall with massive hands and a jaw so prominent his classmates nicknamed him Mushmouth, after a comic strip character, Morton dominated the wrestling mat and football field. But it was in submarine tactics class where instructors noticed something different. While other midshipmen studied defensive manoeuvres, Morton obsessed over attack angles and torpedo spreads. Commissioned as an ensign in June 1930, Morton initially served aboard the aircraft carrier USS Saratoga, then the heavy cruiser USS Chicago. But surface warfare felt restrictive to the aggressive young officer. In 1933, Lieutenant Junior Grade Morton reported to the submarine base at New London, Connecticut, where he would find his calling in the claustrophobic steel cylinders that hunted beneath the waves. The instructors at submarine school noted Morton's unusual approach to command problems. Where doctrine emphasized caution, submarines were scouts, observers, careful hunters, Morton advocated aggression. His training officer, Commander James Fife, wrote in an evaluation, "Lieutenant Morton possesses an aggressive spirit unusual in submarine officers. This trait will serve him well in war, though it must be tempered with judgment." Morton's pre-war career took him through the Asiatic Fleet, serving on the submarine tender USS Canopus and the submarine S-37, patrolling waters around the Philippines that would later become his hunting grounds. He returned to America in 1937 by way of Siberia and Europe, a journey that gave him unique insight into the militarization overtaking both continents. At the Philadelphia Navy Yard, he studied the new fleet submarines being constructed, larger, faster, more heavily armed than anything that had come before. By 1939, Lieutenant Morton served as executive officer aboard the destroyer USS Fairfax, learning surface combat tactics he would later use to revolutionary effect in submarines. When he took command of the submarine R5 in August 1940, Morton had already developed his philosophy of submarine warfare, posting a sign in the control room that read, "We will take the fight to the enemy." December 7, 1941, changed everything. Within hours of Pearl Harbor's bombing, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Harold Stark issued the order that would define Pacific submarine warfare: execute unrestricted air and submarine warfare against Japan. This directive overturned decades of American naval doctrine and international law in a single sentence. Lieutenant Commander Morton, recently promoted on October 15, 1942, was at Mare Island Navy Yard in California, overseeing construction of new submarines. The Navy desperately needed aggressive commanders to replace those who had proven too cautious in the war's opening year. Of the 363 submarine patrols conducted in 1942, most had returned with torpedoes unfired, their captains unable or unwilling to press attacks against Japanese forces. Morton received orders to Pearl Harbor as a prospective commanding officer, first taking nominal command of USS Dolphin while she underwent repairs. But Dolphin was old, slow, unsuited to Morton's aggressive style. His opportunity came when Lieutenant Commander Marvin Kennedy, commanding officer of USS Wahoo, proved too cautious during his second patrol. Navy leadership decided Kennedy needed replacement. Between November 8th and December 26th, 1942, Morton sailed aboard Wahoo as prospective commanding officer, observing Kennedy's methods and mentally cataloguing everything he would change. Kennedy approached enemy ships cautiously, attacked from maximum range, and immediately went deep after firing. Morton watched these tactics with barely concealed frustration, as he confided to fellow officer Lieutenant Richard O'Kane, "We're fighting this war like we're afraid to get our paint scratched." On December 31st, 1942, at Brisbane, Australia, command of USS Wahoo officially transferred to Morton. His first act was to gather the crew in the forward torpedo room. Unlike the formal, distant Kennedy, Morton spoke directly. "Wahoo is expendable. We will take every reasonable precaution, but our mission is to sink enemy ships. We're going to pursue them aggressively. We're not going to run from destroyers. We're going to attack them." The crew exchanged uncertain glances. No submarine commander talked this way. Submarines were valuable assets to be preserved, not thrown into harm's way. But Morton wasn't finished. He produced hand-painted signs reading "Shoot the Sonsa bitches" in red letters and posted them throughout the boat. The transformation of USS Wahoo had begun. Morton's revolutionary approach to submarine warfare became apparent immediately. Where traditional doctrine kept the captain at the periscope during attacks, Morton stationed his executive officer Dick O'Kane at the scope, while Morton coordinated the attack from the conning tower. George Grider, serving as engineering officer, later wrote, "This system required serene faith in a subordinate that few captains could muster. But it freed Morton to absorb all information, sound bearings, torpedo data, ship positions, and make split-second decisions." The innovation extended beyond tactics. Morton eliminated the rigid formality that characterized most submarines. He knew every crew member's name, their hometowns, their concerns. Yeoman Forrest Sterling, who also served as lookout, recalled, "Captain Morton would come through the boat at all hours, checking on us, asking about our families. He made us feel like we were the best submarine crew in the Pacific, and we were determined to prove him right." January 16, 1943, Wahoo departed Brisbane for her third war patrol. Morton had spent the refit period drilling his crew relentlessly. They practiced battle surfaces, emergency surfacing with all weapons manned, until they could execute in under 30 seconds. Morton insisted every crew member understand basic operations outside their specialty. Torpedo men learned to operate the radar. Electricians practiced loading torpedoes. This cross-training would prove crucial in the chaos of combat. The patrol area assigned to Wahoo was Wewak Harbour, New Guinea, a major Japanese staging base considered too dangerous for American submarines to approach. Previous submarines had observed from safe distances, gathering intelligence but avoiding engagement. Morton had different plans. On January 24th, he took Wahoo directly into the harbour's confined waters, so shallow the submarine's keel barely cleared the bottom. At 0800 through the periscope, Morton spotted a destroyer nested with submarines at anchor. Rather than retreat, Morton fired 3 torpedoes at the stationary target. They missed. The destroyer immediately got underway, heading directly for Wahoo's position. Standard doctrine demanded immediate emergency dive and evasion. Morton held position, keeping Wahoo's bow pointed at the approaching destroyer. "Range?" Morton asked calmly. 1,200 yards and closing fast, O'Kane responded. Morton waited. The destroyer's bow wave was visible through the periscope. 800 yards. "Fire 5, Morton ordered. The torpedo struck the destroyer amidships, breaking her back in a massive explosion. Through the periscope, O'Kane observed Japanese sailors flying through the air, over 100 men who had been stationed as lookouts covering every inch of topside. The destroyer sank in minutes. Morton had proven that aggression could overcome superior Japanese anti-submarine tactics. 2 days later, on January 26th, Wahoo's radar detected a large convoy northeast of New Guinea. Morton surfaced in broad daylight, using the submarine's superior surface speed to gain attack position. This violated every principle of submarine warfare. Submarines were supposed to remain submerged during daylight in enemy waters. But Morton understood that Japanese lookouts, conditioned to scan for periscopes, often missed surfaced submarines at distance. The convoy consisted of 6 ships with destroyer escorts. Morton tracked them through the morning, positioning Wahoo perfectly. At 11:30 he fired 4 torpedoes at what appeared to be the largest transport. Through the periscope, O'Kane watched the torpedoes strike home. The 5,447-ton Buyo Maru shuddered, listed, and began settling by the stern. What happened next would divide naval historians for decades. As Wahoo surfaced to recharge batteries depleted by the morning's high-speed chase, Morton observed approximately 20 boats evacuating the sinking transport. Through binoculars he could see they were packed with soldiers, hundreds, perhaps thousands of enemy troops heading for New Guinea's shores just miles away. Morton called his officers to the conning tower. "Gentlemen, we have a situation. Those boats are full of Japanese soldiers. If they reach shore, they'll be killing Americans and Australians within days. What would you do?" Dick O'Kane spoke first. "International law prohibits attacking shipwreck survivors, Captain." "International law also prohibits unrestricted submarine warfare, which we've been conducting since Pearl Harbor," Morton responded. "Those aren't shipwreck survivors. They're enemy combatants using boats as landing craft." George Grider, wrestling with his conscience, offered, "Sir, we don't know if they're all soldiers. There could be crew members, even prisoners." Morton's jaw tightened. "Every Japanese soldier who reaches New Guinea means dead Americans. The Army Air Force bombs entire cities. We're going to stop these soldiers from reaching shore." At approximately 1200 hours, Morton gave the order that would echo through naval history. "Battle surface. Man all weapons." The crew of Wahoo, trained for this moment but not for this purpose, rushed to their stations. The 4-inch deck gun was manned, along with 2 20mm cannons and multiple machine guns. Below, Yeoman Forrest Sterling stood as lookout, watching the scene unfold with growing unease. He would later write in his memoir, "I saw a man in one of the boats waving something white, looked like a shirt or flag. He was trying to surrender." Morton ordered 1 warning shot fired from the deck gun into the largest lifeboat. The response was immediate. Small arms fire from the boats peppered Wahoo's hull. Several bullets struck the conning tower where Morton stood. This return fire in Morton's mind transformed the situation from rescue to combat. "All weapons, open fire," Morton commanded. For the next 30 to 45 minutes, Wahoo made a single pass along the line of boats. The 4-inch gun methodically destroyed the larger launches, while machine guns raked the smaller boats. Through the chaos, individual moments stood out with terrible clarity. A swimmer approached Wahoo's hull, apparently attempting to board. When gunner's mate William White asked if they should take him prisoner, Morton allegedly responded, "Hell no, I don't want the son of a bitch." Do you? The machine guns continued their deadly work. Sterling, watching from his position, later described in his book Wake of the Wahoo seeing bodies floating face down, the water turning red around the shattered boats. Some men tried to swim away, others clung to wreckage. The guns targeted them all. No distinction was made between those who fought and those who surrendered. George Grider, in the engineering spaces below, heard the guns and felt the submarine shudder with each round from the deck gun. In his memoir Warfish, written 15 years later, he would struggle to reconcile the Morton he admired with the commander who ordered this action. Mush was not a cruel man, not a sadist. He was a fighter, determined to win the war by any means necessary. When the guns finally fell silent, no boats remained intact. Hundreds of bodies floated in the oil-slicked water. Morton ordered Wahoo to clear the area, pursuing the remaining convoy ships. In his patrol report, he would write with clinical detachment, "Destroyed all boats and estimated 1,500 to 6,000 enemy troops." The actual number, discovered only after the war, was 282 killed, including 195 Indian prisoners of war. News of Morton's actions spread through the submarine base at Pearl Harbor like wildfire when Wahoo returned on February 7, 1943. The submarine had decorated herself for the triumphant arrival. A broom lashed to the periscope shears indicating a clean sweep, small Japanese flags painted on the conning tower for ships claimed sunk. But in the officers' club and torpedo workshops, submariners discussed the lifeboat incident in hushed tones. Vice Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Pacific Fleet submarines, faced a delicate situation. Morton had violated international law, potentially exposing American submariners to retaliation if captured. Yet Morton was also his most successful commander, having revolutionized submarine tactics and inspired a timid force to become aggressive hunters. Lockwood's solution was masterful in its bureaucratic evasion. He praised Morton's patrol publicly while privately ensuring no official encouragement of similar actions. Captain John Babe Brown, Lockwood's operations officer, interviewed Morton extensively about the incident. According to declassified records, Morton showed no remorse, maintaining his position that preventing enemy troops from reaching shore was legitimate military action. Brown noted, "Commander Morton views this war as total war, without distinction between combatants in uniform and those temporarily in boats." Other submarine commanders reacted with mixed feelings. Commander Lawson Red Ramage, who would later win the Medal of Honor, said, "What Mush did was wrong, but I understand why he did it. We're not playing by Marquis of Queensberry rules out here." Commander Eugene Fluckey, another future Medal of Honor recipient, took the opposite view. "We're Americans. We don't shoot helpless men in the water." The most significant response came from Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane, Morton's executive officer. O'Kane, who would later become the war's most successful submarine commander by ships sunk, defended Morton until his death in 1994. In multiple interviews, O'Kane maintained, "Those troops were armed and heading for shore. They fired on us first. Mush made a military decision to prevent enemy reinforcement of New Guinea. It wasn't pretty, but war never is." The full tragedy of January 26th would not be revealed until post-war investigations uncovered the passenger manifest of Buyo Maru. The ship had been carrying 1,126 souls, 366 Japanese soldiers from the 26th Field Ordnance Depot, and 760 Indian prisoners of war from the 2nd Battalion, 16th Punjab Regiment. These Indian soldiers had been captured during the fall of Singapore on February 15, 1942, Britain's greatest military disaster. Refusing Japanese offers to join the Indian National Army and fight against the British, they were condemned to slave labour in New Guinea. The Japanese had packed them into Buyo Maru's holds without marking the ship as carrying POWs, a clear violation of Geneva Convention requirements. Private Ravi Singh, one of the few Indian survivors, provided testimony to British investigators in 1946. When the torpedo struck, Japanese guards abandoned us in the locked holds. We broke free ourselves. In the boats, we tried to signal the submarine. One man waved his white undershirt. The guards told us to stop, said the Americans would kill us all anyway. They were right. The Japanese guards had prioritized their own soldiers during evacuation. Indians who managed to reach boats were often pushed back into the water. When Wahoo's guns opened fire, the Indians were trapped between their captors and their supposed allies. Of the 195 Indian POWs who died, most were killed by American bullets, not the torpedo that sank their prison ship. Lieutenant Colonel James Wilkinson, conducting the British investigation, concluded in 1947, "The death of these Indian prisoners was a tragic consequence of Japanese refusal to mark prisoner transports and American submarine warfare practices. Commander Morton could not have known Allied prisoners were present." International law regarding submarine warfare in 1943 existed in a state of complete contradiction. The 1936 London Naval Treaty's Article 22 explicitly required submarines to ensure the safety of passengers and crew before sinking merchant vessels, stating that lifeboats are not considered a place of safety unless near land or rescue ships. The 1907 Hague Convention X demanded belligerents protect shipwrecked persons from pillage and ill treatment. Yet from the first day of war, Admiral Nimitz had ordered unrestricted submarine warfare against Japan. Every American submarine commander was technically violating international law with each ship they sank without warning. The Japanese had never ratified the 1936 London Protocol and had announced their own unrestricted submarine warfare policy. Both nations had abandoned legal restrictions in favour of military necessity. Professor James Whitman of Yale Law School, analysing these contradictions decades later, observed, "By 1943, international maritime law had effectively ceased to exist in the Pacific. Both sides operated under the principle that military necessity superseded legal restrictions. Morton's action, while extreme, occurred within this legal vacuum." The precedent for attacking survivors existed, though rarely acknowledged. German U-boats had occasionally machine-gunned survivors, most notoriously when U-852 killed survivors of the Greek steamer Peleus in March 1944. The submarine's commander, Captain Lieutenant Heinz Wilhelm Eck, would be executed for this action after the war. Yet Admiral Karl Dönitz, who issued the Laconia order forbidding U-boats from rescuing survivors, was not convicted of war crimes at Nuremberg, partly because Admiral Nimitz testified that American submarines followed similar practices. Morton's case differed in one crucial aspect. He actively attacked survivors rather than merely abandoning them. This distinction would prove critical in post-war analysis. Captain Jasper Holmes, writing the official history of Pacific submarine operations, deliberately obscured the incident, noting only that Wahoo destroyed the lifeboats without specifying how or why. The Imperial Japanese Navy's reaction to Morton's action was swift and brutal, though they never publicly acknowledged the specific incident. Within weeks, orders circulated through Japanese submarine commands emphasizing that American submarines showed no mercy and deserved none in return. Commander Tetsunosuke Ariezumi of submarine I-8 became the Japanese Navy's most notorious perpetrator of atrocities against survivors. On March 26, 1944, I-8 sank the Dutch merchant ship Chisalak. Ariezumi ordered the 97 survivors brought aboard, then systematically murdered them with swords, hammers and wrenches, while crew members filmed and laughed. Only 5 survived by feigning death and later going overboard. The escalation continued throughout 1944. Japanese submarine 137 machine-gunned survivors of the British merchant ship Ascot in February. I-26 rammed lifeboats after sinking the American Liberty ship Richard Hovey in March. Each atrocity justified by pointing to American submarine practices, specifically mentioning the Wahoo incident in captured Japanese documents. American submariners captured by the Japanese faced particularly harsh treatment. Unlike airmen or surface sailors, submarine crews were often executed immediately upon capture. Of the 374 American submariners captured during the war, only 168 survived Japanese captivity, a death rate approaching 50%. Japanese interrogators specifically asked captured submariners about attacks on survivors, using any admission to justify torture. The cycle of retaliation reached its peak with the Hell ships, unmarked Japanese transports carrying Allied POWs in horrific conditions. By war's end, 134 such ships had transported over 126,000 prisoners. American submarines, unaware of their human cargo, sank 19 of these ships, killing approximately 21,000 Allied POWs. The tragedy of Buyo Maru repeated dozens of times, each incident adding to the war's mounting atrocities. Morton never expressed public remorse for the Buyo Maru incident. If anything, he became more aggressive. Wahoo's 4th patrol in the Yellow Sea saw Morton take his submarine into waters so shallow that Japanese commanders believed them unnavigable by submarines. He sank 9 ships in areas the Japanese considered safe havens. The 5th patrol took Wahoo into the Sea of Japan itself, the Emperor's private lake surrounded by the home islands. No American submarine had penetrated these waters and survived. Morton not only survived, but sank 4 ships before escaping through the heavily mined La Perouse Strait. His reputation reached mythic proportions. Newspapers called him the one-man navy. General MacArthur personally awarded him the Army Distinguished Service Cross. But George Grider noticed changes in his former captain during a brief reunion in August 1943. Morton seemed tired, driven by demons he couldn't name. The easy laugh came less frequently. When Grider asked about the lifeboat incident, Morton changed the subject. "We do what we have to do," was all he would say. In September 1943, Morton took Wahoo on her 7th patrol, again into the Sea of Japan. Before departing, he told Dick O'Kane, now commanding his own submarine, "If we don't make it back, I want you to know you're the best exec I ever had. Take care of yourself." On October 11, 1943, Japanese naval records indicate an American submarine was attacked by aircraft in La Perouse Strait. A massive explosion was observed, followed by an oil slick and debris. USS Wahoo and all 79 hands were never seen again. Morton was 36 years old. The Navy's response to Wahoo's loss was revealing in what it didn't say. Admiral Lockwood recommended Morton for a posthumous Medal of Honor, citing his revolutionary tactics and exceptional courage. The recommendation was denied and downgraded to a 4th Navy Cross. No official reason was given, but naval historians unanimously attribute the denial to the Buyo Maru incident. For 50 years, the incident remained classified. The official patrol report, sanitized for public consumption, mentioned only that Wahoo destroyed lifeboats containing enemy troops. The details, the duration of fire, the methods used, the number killed, were locked in classified files. When George Grider published his memoir Warfish in 1958, naval censors required him to minimize the incident to a few vague paragraphs. The classification served multiple purposes. It protected Morton's family from controversy. It prevented Japanese propaganda from exploiting the incident. Most importantly, it avoided uncomfortable questions about American conduct in the Good War. The Navy preferred Morton be remembered as a heroic innovator rather than a controversial figure who crossed ethical lines. Only in 1995, after most participants had died, did the full details emerge through Freedom of Information Act requests. Historians gained access to the complete patrol reports, crew interviews, and post-war investigations. The revelation sparked renewed debate about submarine warfare ethics and the moral compromises of total war. Dr. Clay Blair, Jr., author of the definitive Silent Victory, the U.S. Submarine War Against Japan, struggled with how to present the incident. His solution was to include it as one of many examples of warfare's brutalization, neither condemning nor condoning Morton's actions. Blair wrote, "War transforms ordinary men into killers. Morton was transformed more than most." The ethical implications of Morton's actions have divided historians and ethicists for 8 decades. Those defending Morton point to several factors. The troops were armed and fired first, they were heading to reinforce enemy positions, and Morton operated within a war where both sides had abandoned traditional restrictions. Professor Michael Walser, in his seminal Just and Unjust Wars, addresses the Morton case obliquely. When survival is at stake, when the enemy has abandoned all restraints, can we judge those who respond in kind? The submarine war in the Pacific presents the hardest case for military ethics, total war between races that viewed each other as subhuman. Critics argue that regardless of context, attacking helpless survivors violates fundamental human principles that transcend legal codes. The presence of Indian POWs, even unknown to Morton, demonstrates the danger of abandoning discrimination between combatants and non-combatants. Once that line is crossed, atrocity becomes inevitable. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, in his study On Killing, identifies the Morton incident as an example of moral injury, actions that soldiers take in war that violate their peacetime ethical foundations. Grossman argues that Morton's post-incident behaviour, increased aggression coupled with apparent depression, suggests deep psychological impact from crossing this moral boundary. The submarine community itself remains divided. At the U.S. Navy Submarine School, the incident is taught as part of ethics training, used to discuss the tensions between military necessity and humanitarian law. Instructors note that no clear answer exists. Each submarine commander must wrestle with these questions individually. The full human dimension of January 26, 1943, emerged only through painstaking post-war research. Japanese survivor Petty Officer Hiroaki Yamada, who spent 6 hours clinging to wreckage, provided crucial testimony in 1962. "The submarine circled us like a shark. We could see the Americans manning the guns. Some of our soldiers fired rifles, stupid gesture. The big gun destroyed boat after boat. Men jumped into the water. The machine guns found them there too." The Indian prisoners' stories proved even more tragic. Lance Corporal Ajit Khan, one of 565 Indians who survived, testified, "We thought the Americans had come to save us. In Singapore, British officers told us Americans treated prisoners well. When the shooting started, we couldn't believe it. Some men stood up, hands raised. They died standing." The Japanese had kept meticulous records of the Indian prisoners, intending to use them for propaganda if they later joined the Japanese cause. These records revealed personal details that humanized the tragedy. Among the dead, Havildar Bhagat Ram, 28, who had 3 children in Punjab; Sepoy Mohan Lal, 19, who had joined the army to escape poverty; Naik Gurdit Singh, 35, who had won commendations for bravery in the Malayan campaign. On the Japanese side, the 366 soldiers from the 26th Field Ordnance Depot were mostly conscripts, average age 22. Their commander, Major Yoshiro Tanaka, left a widow and 2 children. He was last seen trying to maintain order in the boats before Wahoo's guns opened fire. His body was never recovered. The ripple effects extended to families who never learned their loved one's fate. The Indian prisoners were listed as missing, presumed dead, with no details. Their families waited years for news that never came. Only in 1947 did the British government notify next of kin, providing minimal information to avoid diplomatic complications with the newly independent India and Pakistan. Despite the controversy, Morton's aggressive tactics transformed American submarine warfare. Before Morton, Pacific Fleet submarines had sunk an average of 0.5 ships per patrol. After Morton demonstrated what aggression could achieve, that average tripled. Submarine commanders who had been cautious became hunters. The silent service found its voice. Admiral Lockwood, writing in his classified war diary, noted, "Morton has shown our commanders what is possible. His tactics, while sometimes questionable, have revolutionized our approach. We are no longer a timid force hiding from destroyers. We are predators." The statistics bore this out. In 1942, American submarines sank 180 Japanese ships. In 1943, following Morton's example, they sank 335. By 1944, submarines were sinking ships faster than Japan could build them. The maritime nation that depended on imports for survival was being strangled by 250 American submarines operating from Pearl Harbor and Australia. Morton's specific innovations became standard doctrine. The practice of having executive officers man the periscope during attacks was adopted fleet-wide. Surface attacks in daylight, considered suicidal before Morton, became routine. Most importantly, Morton's attitude, that submarines were offensive weapons, not defensive scouts, permeated the entire force. Commander Lawson Ramage, conducting a surface night attack that would earn him the Medal of Honor, explicitly credited Morton. "I thought of Mush up there on the bridge, never flinching as destroyers charged him. If he could do it, so could I." Ramage sank 5 ships in one night, matching Morton's audacity if not his ethical transgressions. In October 2006, a Russian diving team discovered Wahoo's wreck in La Pérouse Strait, 213 feet below the surface. The submarine lay broken in 3 sections, evidence of catastrophic explosion. The bow section, containing the forward torpedo room where Morton had first addressed his crew, was intact. Inside lay the remains of 79 American sailors. The discovery renewed interest in Morton and the Buyo Maru incident. Japanese researchers, accessing previously closed archives, found disturbing evidence that the Imperial Navy had specifically targeted Wahoo for destruction, codenaming the operation Vengeance for Buyo. Radio intercepts suggest Japanese commanders knew exactly which submarine they were hunting in October 1943. More disturbing were discoveries about the Indian prisoners. Research by Indian historian Dr. Pratap Singh revealed that the 2nd Battalion, 16th Punjab Regiment prisoners had attempted to signal Wahoo during the attack. Several spoke English and tried shouting their identity. The gunfire was too loud, the distance too great. Their desperate attempts to identify themselves as allies failed. The Japanese government, when presented with evidence of unmarked prisoner transports, offered no apology. Official spokesman Hiroshi Yamamoto stated in 2007, "The events of the war were tragic for all sides. Japan has acknowledged its responsibilities in appropriate forums. The Indian government has never officially commented on the loss of these soldiers. Morton's legacy remains irreducibly complex. The US Navy continues to honor him as one of its greatest submarine commanders. The submarine USS Morton DD 948, commissioned in 1959, bore his name until decommissioning in 1990. At the Naval Academy, Morton Hall houses visiting dignitaries. His aggressive tactics are studied at the Naval War College as examples of successful innovation. Yet the Buyo Maru incident cannot be erased. In 2003, when the Navy considered naming a new attack submarine after Morton, protests from human rights organizations and Indian American groups forced reconsideration. The submarine was named USS Texas instead. The controversy demonstrated that even 60 years later, Morton's actions remained divisive. George Grider, who knew Morton better than most, spent his final years wrestling with his commander's legacy. In a 1988 interview, 3 years before his death, Grider said, "Mush was the bravest man I ever knew and the most effective submarine commander of the war. But what happened that day haunts me. We became something we weren't supposed to be. We crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed." Dick O'Kane, who inherited Morton's aggressive spirit and became the war's most successful submarine commander, defended Morton to the end. In his last public interview in 1993, O'Kane insisted, "War is not a game with rules. The Japanese started this war with a sneak attack. They tortured and murdered prisoners. Mush did what he thought necessary to win. Judge him by the standards of that time, not by peacetime morality." Morton's action, while exceptional in American submarine warfare, was part of a broader pattern of escalating brutality in the Pacific. American submarines operated under orders that would have been unthinkable before Pearl Harbor. Japanese submarines committed atrocities that dwarfed Morton's actions. Both sides had abandoned the laws of civilized warfare in favor of racial annihilation. By war's end, American submarines had sunk 1,314 Japanese vessels, totaling 5.3 million tons, 55% of all Japanese losses. They achieved this while suffering the highest casualty rate of any American service. 22% killed in action, 52 submarines lost with 3,506 men. The submarine force comprised just 2% of Navy personnel but accounted for 55% of Japanese maritime losses. These statistics came at a moral cost. Beyond Morton's incident, American submarines routinely left survivors to drown, reasoning that rescue would compromise operational security. They attacked hospital ships suspected of carrying military supplies. They laid mines in waters used by fishing boats and civilian ferries. Total war meant total abandonment of discrimination. The Japanese submarine force operated with even fewer restrictions. Beyond documented atrocities against survivors, Japanese submarines conducted biological warfare attacks on the American mainland, though unsuccessfully. They planned, though never executed, attacks on the Panama Canal, using aircraft carrying plague-infected fleas. In this context of unlimited warfare, Morton's actions seem less aberrant, though no less troubling. Contemporary military ethicists studying the Morton case reach conflicting conclusions. The U.S. Naval War College's Ethics Department uses the incident in its curriculum, presenting students with Morton's exact scenario: enemy troops in lifeboats heading for nearby shores. Responses vary dramatically based on officers' combat experience and cultural backgrounds. Captain James Campbell, teaching ethics at Annapolis, observes, "Morton represents the eternal tension between winning and maintaining moral authority. He was supremely effective at sinking ships and killing enemies. But effectiveness without ethics leads to barbarism. We study Morton to understand where the lines are and why they matter." International humanitarian law has evolved significantly since 1943. The 1949 Geneva Conventions explicitly protect shipwreck survivors, regardless of their combatant status. The 1977 additional protocols strengthen these protections, yet enforcement remains problematic in asymmetric conflicts where non-state actors operate outside legal frameworks. Modern submarine commanders face similar dilemmas with updated technology. Should an attack submarine torpedo a vessel suspected of carrying terrorists? What if civilians are aboard? The Morton precedent offers no clear answers, only the warning that actions taken in war's heat can define a legacy forever. Forrest Sterling, Wahoo's yeoman who witnessed the lifeboat attack, lived until 2002. In his memoir, Wake of the Wahoo, published in 1999, Sterling provided perhaps the most honest assessment of the incident. "I was 21 years old, standing lookout while we killed those men in the boats. I saw one trying to surrender with a white flag. I've lived with that image for 60 years. Captain Morton was a great commander who made us the best submarine in the Pacific. But what we did that day was wrong. We knew it was wrong while we were doing it. but we did it anyway because the captain ordered it and we trusted him. People ask if I hate Morton for making me part of that. I don't. He was trying to win the war the only way he knew how, by killing every enemy he could find. The real crime was the war itself, that it made good men like Morton into killers, and killers into heroes. We celebrated him for sinking ships and gave him medals for sending thousands to their deaths. Then we act surprised when he killed men in lifeboats. The truth is, submarine warfare was always about killing helpless people. Every merchant ship we torpedoed was full of sailors who never had a chance. We just didn't have to watch them die. That day with the lifeboats, we had to watch. We had to participate. That's the only difference. We saw the faces of the men we killed. The final accounting of January 26, 1943, based on post-war research. Buyo Maru's complement, 1,126 total personnel aboard. 366 Japanese soldiers from the 26th Field Ordnance Depot. 760 Indian POWs from 2nd Battalion, 16th Punjab Regiment. 195 Indian POWs killed in the attack. 87 Japanese soldiers killed. Total killed by gunfire, 282. Survivors rescued by Japanese vessels, 844. Wahoo's third patrol results, 8 ships claimed sunk, actual 4 confirmed. Tonnage claimed 32,000, actual 16,000. Ammunition expended on lifeboats 20 rounds from 4-inch deck gun, approximately 2,000 rounds of 20mm cannon. Unknown thousands of machine gun rounds. Time engaged with lifeboats, 30 to 45 minutes. Distance to nearest land, 3 to 5 miles. Career statistics for Morton. Total patrols as commander, 5, Wahoo's 3rd through 7th. Ships sunk, 19 confirmed. Tonnage sunk, 55,000 tons. Days on patrol, 138. Crew lost under his command, 79, entire complement on final patrol. The wreck of USS Wahoo lies in international waters between Japan and Russia, an iron tomb for 79 Americans who followed their commander into legend and death. No effort has been made to recover the bodies. The submarine is considered a war grave, protected by international agreement from salvage or disturbance. In 2008, a joint American-Japanese expedition placed memorial plaques at the site. The American plaque reads, "To the brave men of USS Wahoo still on patrol." The Japanese plaque memorializes all who died in the seas between our nations. Neither mentions the Indians who died on January 26, 1943, caught between empires in a war not of their making. Morton's widow, Harriet, lived until 1979, never remarrying. She kept Morton's letters but never discussed their contents. After her death, the letters were donated to the Naval Historical Centre with the stipulation they remain sealed until 2043, 100 years after Morton's death. What final thoughts Morton shared with his wife remain unknown. The last surviving Wahoo crew member from the pre-Morton patrols, motor machinist's mate Andrew Lennox, died in 2019 at age 98. He had transferred off Wahoo just weeks before the Buyo Maru incident. Asked about Morton in his final interview, Lennox said, "Mush Morton was the finest submarine commander who ever lived and the most dangerous man I ever met. Thank God I wasn't aboard for his 3rd patrol. I don't think I could have lived with what they did." The story of USS Wahoo's attack on lifeboat survivors on January 26, 1943, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about warfare's capacity to corrupt even the most professional military forces. Morton didn't act from cruelty or sadism, but from a logical extension of total war's premises. If the enemy must be destroyed, why not destroy him when he's most vulnerable? Lieutenant Commander Dudley Walker Morton crossed a line that day in waters north of New Guinea. It was a line drawn by international law, maritime tradition, and basic humanity. He crossed it believing military necessity justified his actions. that saving American lives required killing Japanese soldiers even when they posed no immediate threat. The 195 Indian prisoners who died alongside those Japanese soldiers stand as permanent testimony to the danger of such logic. The submarine force Morton inspired would go on to strangle Japan's maritime lifelines, contributing significantly to Allied victory. His aggressive tactics revolutionized submarine warfare and inspired a generation of commanders. Yet his legacy remains forever shadowed by those 30 to 45 minutes when American naval power revealed its capacity for acts that peacetime morality unconditionally condemns. In the end, the Allies and Japanese, who never expected American submarines to fire on lifeboat survivors, learned that total war transforms all participants, that no one maintains moral superiority when survival is at stake. Morton proved that American submariners could be as ruthless as any warrior in history. Whether this was necessary, justified, or criminal remains a question each generation must answer anew. The USS Wahoo rests 213 feet below the surface of La Perouse Strait, holding the remains of 79 Americans who followed their commander into history's darkest waters. They remain on eternal patrol, a reminder that war's greatest casualty is often our humanity, and that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. The 282 men who died in the water that January day, Japanese soldiers, Indian prisoners, men with families and futures, became casualties not just of war, but of war's logic taken to its ultimate terrible conclusion. This is Morton's true legacy, not just the ships he sank or the tactics he pioneered, but the eternal question his actions pose about what we're willing to do to win, and whether any victory is worth achieving through means that destroy what we claim to defend.